quarterback Trevor Lawrence, and he himself has weighed in on Twitter. He tweeted, "There has to be a shift in the way of thinking. Rational must outweigh irrational. Justice must outweigh injustice. Love must outweigh hate. If you put yourself in someone else's shoes and you don't like how it feels, that's when you know things need to change. I'm siding with my brothers that deal and continuously deal with things I will never experience. The injustice is clear and so is the hate. It can no longer be explained away. If you're still explaining it, check your heart and ask why." Again, those are the words of Trevor Lawrence, showing exemplary leadership off the field to align with what we have regularly seen from his leadership on the field. Trevor Lawrence is one of the most anticipated prospects in a very long time. For that part of the story, here's Laura Rutledge.
I wanted to have a big impact as a freshman.
Lawrence with the rush coming, finds T. Higgins, touchdown.
I think when it was all said and done, Trevor Lawrence would be the first overall pick.
If the rules were different, Trevor Lawrence might already be in the NFL, with certainty surrounding his upcoming season. Instead, he has another chance to prove it wasn't just one exceptional game.
The Tigers reclaim their crown by crushing Alabama.
Oh, that game. A slaughtering of Alabama to win it all, and the time Trevor Lawrence beat two top 5 opponents by at least 25 points in the span of 11 days. He was on fire.
Trevor Lawrence is a freak.
His sophomore season was different mostly because Lawrence was tasked with chasing his own greatness. His interception total doubled. His completion percentage just 51% against top teams Ohio State and LSU. He had a career-high 10 off-target throws against the Purple and Gold Tigers in the national championship.
You know, they beat us tonight. There's no excuses.
Trevor Lawrence was human at times in 2019.
It's going to be picked off as he makes a mistake. So unlike Trevor Lawrence.
And also inhuman.
Lawrence took a peek downfield, and breaks a tackle, and is still running. Lawrence, touchdown Tigers! Wow!
In 2020, Lawrence has a chance to prove once and for all he's at the top of the game and the top of the draft.
So one of the most interesting storylines here with Mr. T and Ryan Clark back with us. And Mike Tannenbaum, I want to start with you as an evaluator. If you were starting a franchise right now, and you could draft amongst all of the quarterbacks that exist, the college, and literally putting everyone into the conversation, taking into account their age and everything else, where would Trevor Lawrence wind up going?
Greedy, he'd be number 2 for me. It's Patrick Mahomes, draw a line. It's Trevor Lawrence, and maybe in that conversation, you would have Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Aaron Rodgers, because of age, is probably out. Lamar Jackson's below that. There's other players I like a lot, like Carson Wentz, but durability becomes a factor. This guy checks all the boxes, and oh, by the way, he won't be 21 until October. He has all the physical attributes. You touched on his leadership already. This is a transformational talent who's lost one game in college, and by the way, the game he lost against LSU, he threw for 394 yards. So, RC, I want to turn to you because I think Laura did a good job of painting it this way. Like, the expectations for Lawrence were off the charts, right? He had to be perfect. Otherwise, we'd think his season was a disappointment. So maybe it's unfair for me to say my perception of his season last year was that it wasn't spectacular. They didn't play great competition. His numbers weren't quite as good as we were expecting them to be. And in the biggest games, I didn't think he played that well. You watch these games more closely than I do, RC. Is that a reasonable assessment of the season he just had?
Listen, I mean, you know, I upset a lot of people the night after, or the morning after the national championship by saying I just didn't see it. No, I can't say this. I got to meet Trevor Lawrence before he got to Clemson, before his senior year. I was working at a camp and I was coaching 7-on-7 defenses. Justin Fields was my quarterback, and I watched Trevor Lawrence play, and he has it all. He's tall, he has a cannon, he understands the game, but being on the sideline against LSU in the national championship, he was off and he wasn't good. And you can speak about 394 passing yards, but I'm talking about the errant throws. I'm speaking of having T. Higgins, who was an early second-round pick, and Justin Ross on the other side with Travis Etienne, and not being able to move the ball, and it largely being Trevor Lawrence's fault. And so do I think that he has every measurable that you need? Do I think that he's going to be an excellent professional football quarterback? I do. But right now, looking at Trevor Lawrence, even though he has a transcendent talent level, I have not seen a transcendent football player. You go early last season, he struggled. Then he hit a stretch against ACC talent that we barely even got to watch, and I only watched because of this job. And we saw him struggle against Ohio State, which is when I gained a lot of respect for him because he found other ways to get a win. But in the biggest moments, in the best of times when they needed him last year, I don't think he was great. And that is important to remember because the 2 times we needed Deshaun Jackson as a Clemson Tiger, he showed up against Alabama, and he was spectacular. He was the best player on the field. I haven't seen that from Trevor Lawrence.
And again, it's in being fair to him in every conceivable way. He's going into his junior year, as you just said, Mike Tannenbaum. He's young. We're not trying to knock him here, but people do, and Mike, you're doing it, and Mel has done it as well, has talked about like the best prospects he's ever seen, Andrew Luck, John Elway. You're putting him, Mike Tannenbaum, on that class and that category as a prospect.
Yeah, and not only that, he's clearly better than the last 3 first overall picks, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, and I would still take him over Joe Burrow in deference, I know, to RC's LSU Tigers because, again, of the size.
It's all good.
He's done it over 2 years. We can knock him for that one bad game, which, again, he was off, admittedly so, but he has 66 touchdowns in 2 years, and he's still 20 years old. He checks all the boxes, and the reason I would take him over Burrow is if Burrow was great, Urban Meyer knows what he's doing. Urban Meyer would have played him at Ohio State, and Burrow, let's face it, averaged his first year at LSU. So I'm taking nothing away from Joe Burrow. He was historic last year, but to me, greatness, as Mel Kiper, as you alluded to, Greeny, Elway, Luck, I put Trevor Lawrence in that category because he's always been great.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.